I want to help with revolution. I said, but in order to have a revolution, you're going to need guns and bullets. The party didn't have any wealth. The people over here wasn't sending no whole lot of money to the brothers in exile. They hardly never do. They don't have none themselves. They fighting cases. They write on everybody. So my suggestion was, the idea, at least it was supposed to be the idea, that we're going to get set up over here. We're going to build an army, and we're going to go back and take over America. Now, you got to remember, we're young, so hey, this is what else reason would we have to be in exile? Everybody else was in exile for that reason. Remember, Algeria was a frontline state. So was Tanzania. You read the history books. When Mandela and them first went to exile, they was in Algeria. You remember it was an Arab country like? They was in Algeria. Why? They could get training. Algeria was liberated in '65. Ahmed bin Bella was the president. By the time we got there, Boumediene Adine was in. Okay. So those countries were frontline states. Algeria was a frontline state. The next state I went to was Tanzania. That was a black African frontline state. Because over there, after we was there with Arabs for a while, we wanted to be in a black frontline state. Okay. So I want you also to remind the people that it wasn't just a pipe dream, that when I came back to visit in 1973, I also bought a package with me. And I had brought a big package, but when I first came back, I came back to Algeria looking for everybody. I didn't read no newspapers or nothing like that. I came back to Algeria. Everybody was gone, except there was a few people still there, but I didn't know what it was. And I could see that the government, something was wrong, you know. So I sent the little girl I had back to the United States, and I said, well, I'm going to go around, and I went to Tanzania. You could tell I had a nice piece of money because in France, they have a law that you can have all the money you want in transit, but you should write it down. And I didn't write it down because it ain't none of your business. You go back to '73, in France, on the record, they confiscated 10% of the money that I had. Remember, when I first come there, I'm bringing money. We had to get organized. I suggested in '71, or someone said I suggested, that if we want to have a rebellion and money and stuff like bullets, then what we'll do is we'll sell dope. The Panther Party refused that. He said, no, we can't do that. That's technically it's against our principles. Of course, half of the people, and y'all can verify. Say, cool, I'm sure you can verify, and I know Pete can, that everybody didn't technically go along. They went along with it because it's the party line. But when they came to me, that's not a bad idea. You know, that's a fact. So, when I came back 2 years later, when I left, I went and I did exactly what I said. I said, well, if y'all don't want to use the people we got to develop a drug cartel that we use to support the rebellion, example, all the FARC, everybody in South America, right, sell drugs to help their party. That's how the FARC got so big down there. M19, all of them, they got big. Why do you think the United States had to go down there and get rid of them a few years ago? Because they was interfering with the American cocaine traffic. They was all new shiny weapons. And remember, if they got all that money, hey man, they could roll. That was the idea when I got there. The other thing that I mentioned to the people, now remember, I'm coming from America. I'm coming and now I'm disciplined and ready to go. The first thing I told the brothers, and I'm also talking to Pete, and I'm definitely talking to Sekou Dinga. Y'all can verify it or not, but I'm sure you would. That there was very little discipline in Algeria. In fact, most of the brothers went down at least once a day and bought hashish on the Rue de Douche Mourad. And I told the brothers, hold it. A revolutionary can't do that. Now remember, when I get there, I'm full of game. I got the whole game plus that you could have in 1971. And I'm coming there to be a revolutionary. We was a revolutionary before we left, but on a different level. Do y'all remember us talking about East Oakland Enterprises? Now, this goes out to anybody in Oakland. East Oakland Enterprises. I want you to count the number of jobs, because everybody said that I had hired more people in the city. The number of Cadillacs, the number of houses, and the number of families that stayed together during, let's call it my administration. That's what it was, because I was kind of like a nice godfather. Also, everybody in Oakland, remind the people that's listening to this, nobody ever got assaulted, beat up, or killed under our administration. Nobody. It's unheard of, because we was in a game that knocked people over all the time. But our game was black nationalism. That's what we were, black nationalists. Just look at the whole structure. Businesses, organization. I want you to look at how organized East Oakland was and what the structure looked like. I don't know how many businesses I had. I had 3 record shops, easy, and I had all kind of businesses all throughout Oakland. And anybody that needed money, for instance, if my friends were boxers, I tell them, think of some of the boxing matches that went on downtown at the Oakland Auditorium. If my friend, which was a boxer, George Cooper, been my friend since we was kids, oh, you need some money to do, hey, why don't y'all, our idea, why don't you promote your own fights? So Mr. Moore, his trainer, that's what he gave. I gave the money to him. He gave the money to Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore did not know how to manage. He was a trainer, like. So after a couple of go-rounds, they just said, and we agreed, okay, forget it. But anybody that had any skill, we would give them whatever they needed to get started. That's why East Oakland in those days was the center of the biggest wealth that was in Oakland at that time. That's what East Oakland was. And it was in transition. West Oakland and North Oakland was the first part of Oakland settled by blacks down by the train station because of the porters, the Pullman porters, they started around the train station. Because remember, you can't take a train in those days over to San Francisco because there's no bridge, right? So it stopped in Oakland, 8 miles from San Francisco. So the Pullman porters was all headquartered in Oakland. That was the beginning of the black community in Oakland. They all settled around, and they began to live around, and they began to stay around West Oakland. So the first black settlers was in West Oakland. We were all in East Oakland. Oh, we was. East Oakland was from First Avenue all the way out to 105th. West Oakland was from other side of downtown, a few blocks was West Oakland. North Oakland, same. In other words, East Oakland, then and now, was most of Oakland. 70% of Oakland is East Oakland. The squares lived in East Oakland. The people had jobs and all of that. Remember in those days, people had jobs. Everybody worked at the cannery. Everybody, I don't care, you could walk out of one joint and walk into another with a job. It didn't make a difference. That's how it was in the early and middle 60s in Oakland and everywhere else. So, what we did was we developed our region. And remember now, everybody left East Oakland alone. It's just a bunch of squares out there and everything, right? Man, when we jumped up and they looked around, you look at them movies like the Mac and all that, those were poor Negroes. They was from West Oakland. All the Negroes, let me say it again so you get understanding. All those Negroes that you saw on the Mac, well, not a couple of them was from East Oakland, but most of them was from West Oakland. When we came up, bam, it was a shock to the whole Oakland. But we had been bathed in black nationalism. That's why we didn't kill nobody. That's why we just, Our feeling was that the black community, it was very similar to Malcolm's. It should control their neighborhood, whatever goes in and comes out of the black neighborhood. That's the way East Oakland was, since it's most of Oakland. From East Oakland, we supplied the whole region with whatever we supplied them with. And we only dealt in sanitary drugs, marijuana, cocaine. Every now and then we got stuck with a little crank. It's easy to get stuck with crank because, boy, it used to turn a lot of money in those days. I mean, big money, fast. Not as fast as heroin. We never dealt no heroin. You can't find on the record nowhere where we dealt in heroin. Okay, let me, because why? It was the ethics, it was morals. Why did we go to South America instead of Southeast Asia? Because South America is where cocaine come from. The only people who snort cocaine is Red Fox, Aretha Franklin, and all of them, right? Well, I'm not saying, let's strike that from the record. And one of my best friends, but the saddest, dear Richard Pryor. He could snort all the cocaine, start off snorting, but then when the pipe come out, you couldn't help him. You couldn't help him. You couldn't help nobody else either. Let me speed up and get back to the point. Here we had a decision to make. This was our disguise till the police figured out what we was doing. They said, them niggas done knocked this town over, because you know what people tell, that they do this, they do that. Well, who runs such and such? You know. Well, they do. Who was it? Half of the people was ex-Panthers. If you watch the movies and the news, you would think everybody was running in behind the Panthers. Get you on your telephone and call the old people in Oakland and ask them, was there a difference between the Black Panthers and us? We're helping the Black Panther Party. But everybody